Under the same roof, we share the love, embracing the differences like hand in glove. Spreading peace and joy, it's a beautiful sight. Together we shine in each other's light. United we stand in love's pure might. Watching the world share in love and light. Hearts beating as one in our peaceful flight. Colors of harmony painting the night. United we stand in love's pure might.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and watching the world. We have an exciting show for you tonight. Recently, we had a lot of news to cover. Today, I was at the courthouse covering the case of Luigi Mangione, and it was quite cold out there. You saw all the people out on the street. We interviewed a lot of people. What did you think about these individuals that feel like he should be able to perhaps even walk free? A lot of people have the John Q mentality that perhaps even the healthcare system is faltered. They have individuals in their families struggling with cancer and diabetes. I know you guys heard people talking about it today. And so they feel like something major needs to be done, even if it involves violence sometimes. I was very shocked to hear that. But that's what was revealed today. What did you guys think that tuned in for the live this morning? Tomorrow, we'll be back in court to see what's going to happen as far as they're setting up the entire trial, aiming for January the 9th. So we're going to be covering it. But tonight, we're going to have a discussion with a gentleman who's something like a scholar when it comes to the Bible. Recently, I saw him do a very deep dive, a breakdown of the New Testament. A lot of people are just used to the Bible when it comes to what they hear in church or what their grandmother, grandfather told them. But a lot of times, a lot of people are not familiar when it comes to the Bible, the history behind it, or the people involved. Who are the writers? Who are the authors? Why did they write it? Which of the books actually are real history? These are the discussions that we're going to be having tonight. In fact, he has a whole sort of a breakdown with slides to help you navigate. And feel free, if you have any questions toward the end or throughout the process, you could feel free to come on the show and ask a few questions or put your question in the comment. So I'm going to be bringing on Selah Shalom, and he's going to really help us to understand the New Testament, especially when it comes to the Gospels. On Monday nights, we're going to be having these type of discussions. So for those of you who have been requesting that I do this, well, here's your chance to really see some of the Bible history that you've been inquiring about. Okay, so let's welcome in Selah Shalom. Okay, how are you?
Hey, peace, my brother. All is well. Thanks for having me on your platform.
Okay, definitely. I saw your presentation the other night online, and I thought it was fantastic. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on and really helping us to have this discussion so that people can understand the Bible, maybe from a different light, a light that perhaps they haven't even heard about before. Okay, so we have some bishops here. Wow, this is a good crowd we have. So this should be very exciting. So let me ask you a question right off the top. What intrigued or piqued your interest when it came to the New Testament?
Well, actually, I was doing a presentation on a brother named Sanetta's channel where you saw me speaking on the Ethiopian Bible, a product of Rome. That was the title of it. And I just wanted to dive into that because when studying scriptures, you realize that a lot of Rome has influenced the text. So when I was doing my research on the Ethiopian Bible, I come to find out that Rome is inspiring that book as well. So I went ahead and did a presentation to show the people that I know we believe that the Ethiopian Bible is authentic and original, but they do have strong influence coming from Rome.
Yeah, I've had people tell me, a lot of people, especially older black people, say the Ethiopian Bible is the first Bible ever made. That's what they say, whether it's true or not. So I'm excited to hear your breakdown. So I'll let you lead the way here. Do you want me to show the screen?
Yeah, you can share my screen.
Okay, very good. Take it away. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Here we go. All right. So this is the Ethiopian Bible, a product of Rome, by me, myself, Selah Shalom. Now, this presentation, the Ethiopian Bible, a product of Rome, examines how Ethiopian Christianity developed under the influence of the Roman Empire through the Church of Alexandria. By the 4th century, Rome controlled Alexandria's religious leaders, and the traditional claim that St. Mark founded the church is questionable. Christianity reached Ethiopia through Roman alliance Alexandrian missionaries. This presentation also shows how many features of the Ethiopian church, its hierarchy, liturgy, and scriptural traditions mirror structures found in the broader Rome and Catholic Empire. So now,
Could I just stop you for 1 second there?
yes.
Could you, and okay, so you're about to get to it, but could you just explain a little bit about where Alexandria is located in connection with Ethiopia and so
Yeah,
forth?
Alexandria is headquartered in Egypt. And that's one of the stomping grounds when Rome took over that they established as headquarters, Alexandria of Egypt.
Okay, and I just want to, not to get, I'm going to try to contain myself here, but I just came back from Rome within the last year. And
Oh,
what I
wow.
didn't realize, right, that they had some 5 to 6 million people under their empire, and they pretty much control the entire uh, parameter around the water. It's like fascinating to me. I didn't know, and it went all the way down to Egypt. I didn't know that till I
Yeah,
actually.
the Roman Empire was vast. Once they was established in 30 BC under Octavian, by the time you get to the 3rd, 4th century, they're a vast empire.
Okay.
So Alexandria is located in Egypt. Now, in 331, Alexander the Macedonian, known as Alexander the Great, conquered Egypt. So from 331 BC onward, Egypt was under rule by the Macedonian Greeks under the Ptolemaic dynasty. After nearly 301 years of Ptolemaic control, Alexandria and the rest of Egypt were conquered by Rome in 30 BC during the reign of Octavian. And here is a description of Octavian. In 30 BCE, Octavian, later the Emperor Augustus, formally brought Alexandria and Egypt under Roman rule. The city held the key to the Egyptian granary, on which Rome increasingly came to rely. So, 72 years later, from 30 BCE to 42 CE Common Era, you have the Patriarch of Alexandria established in 42 under St. Mark, the evangelist. So now here's where it gets a little tricky. According to tradition, in 49 AD Common Era, about 16 years after the ascension of Jesus, Mark traveled to Alexandria and founded the Church of Alexandria, having already been in Egypt for 4 to 5 years. The Coptic Church, the Coptic Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church in Alexandria, and the Coptic Catholic Church all trace their origin to this original community. Now, this is important because this is where it all starts. The oldest physical evidence of the Gospel of Mark is Papyrus 137, and that's dated to 150, 200 Common Era, 2nd century Common Era, and it's written in Greek, not Hebrew. The Gospel of Mark was originally anonymous. The name Mark first appears in the 2nd century. The earliest known person to connect the Gospel to Mark is Papyrus of Hierapolis, quoted by Eusebius in the 2nd, 3rd century Common, the 3rd, 4th century Common Era. Now here's a source in the church history, chapter 3, verse 39, it states, Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately everything he remembered. So that's the quote coming from Eusebius' book, quote in Papyrus. But this is the earliest source linking the gospel to Mark during the 3rd and 4th century.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Yes, sir.
So most people are under the belief that Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, but especially Mark, right? That they actually were walking beside Jesus, writing down everything they saw and heard. So according to what you're saying, can you shed some light on this?
Yeah, when all of the gospels, the earliest gospels were found, especially the four, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, those names were not the original names. They were anonymous, meaning to say that they had no names for these gospels. So these texts were anonymous. And it was during the 2nd century, one of the church fathers, we don't know who, it's not documented historically, but we do know that somebody within that time period of the 2nd century added the name Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And the very first time we attest to the Gospel of Mark is through the quote of Eusebian during the 2nd and 4th century. And what he quotes is from the church history, chapter 3, verse 39. Mark, having been the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately everything he remembered. That is the very first time Mark is mentioned, or one of the earliest attested sources referencing the name Mark. Prior to that, it was anonymous.
Okay, thank you very much for breaking that down. So that's an eye-opener for many, I would imagine. Could you also just explain a little bit about the church fathers? Because I would imagine some people probably, that's not something you hear readily in church.
Yeah, now, the Church of Alexandria started with the Apostle St. Mark. He was supposed to have come to Egypt and started the church, the Coptic Church of Alexandria. And he was supposed to be the first to say bishop. And then from him, after him, you have a line of patriarchs coming down the line. You have a pedigree and a lineage coming from St. Mark. And some of these people like Anastasius and Alexander the First are the patriarchs. Some of these bishops that came much later proclaim the lineage of this hierarchy, of this this pedigree of following the bishop since St. Mark. So
Okay.
essentially, they're following a false narrative because there never was a person named St. Mark in the 1st century. That was a pen name added by the church fathers in the 2nd century. So the idea of following a pedigree of patriots coming from St. Mark is a false narrative.
Now, according to modern scholarship, what they teach that Mark was written around 70, and then Matthew perhaps 10 years later, then Luke, and then the book
Right.
of John, right?
But that's all backdated because the earliest papyrus, the earliest physical evidence we have, as you see here, is P137, and that's dated to the 2nd century Common Era. So what the church fathers had to do was examine these scripts, and by the examination of these scripts, they have to backdate to the time period that they may feel that these scripts was written, and based off the writing style and things of that nature, or certain names that may be mentioned like Nero or Titus, then they'll kind of place the history. They'll backdate the history to those time periods. But the actual physical evidence of these gospels were found during the 2nd and 3rd century, and all of it was backdated to the 1st century.
Man, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yes, sir. All right. So the Gospel of Mark was originally anonymous. The name Mark first appears in the 2nd century. Okay, we just read that. Coming back down here now. Now, with this in mind, if the Gospel of Mark was originally anonymous, with no author's name attached and no individual named Mark mentioned anywhere in the text, then there is no 1st century evidence for historical St. Mark as the author. This suggests that the name Mark was later attributed to the gospel and imposed upon the tradition. The earliest surviving manuscripts that even reference the title, according to Mark, appears much later in Papyrus 137, dated to the 2nd century Common Era. What does anonymous mean? Of a person not identified by name, of unknown name. So when we examine these texts, we see that they have no authors attached to them. So somebody had to put the name St. Mark to these texts. Therefore, the idea that St. Mark found an established church in Alexandria in the 1st century is unsupported and appears to be a late fabrication. There is no archaeological or inscriptional evidence of the Gospel of Mark prior to the 2nd century Common Era. And references to a distinct church of Alexandria only begin appearing in the 2nd and 3rd century CE Common Era, several generations later. Now here is a map, because we always like my crew, we always like to put things on a map so we could get a clear timeline of what's going on. So here you have the start of Rome by Octavian in 30 BC. And then after that, you have St. Mark established in the Church of Alexandria in Egypt in 42 AD. But the papyruses weren't found until the 2nd and 3rd century Common Era. And then those studying these papyruses had to backdate it to get a date of 42 AD, because there's no written account until we get to the 3rd century Common Era, 2nd century Common Era. So now, like I said, this presentation was specifically dealing with the Ethiopian Bible. So the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, the first reference of an Ethiopian being baptized in Christ is in the book of Acts, chapter 8, 27, 38, and 39. Now, some make the claim that he was the first one to bring the gospel to Ethiopia. Right. Verse 27. And he arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasures, and had come to Jerusalem to worship. Verse 38. And he commanded the chariots to stand still, and they went down both into the water, both Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized them. Verse 39. And when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more, and he went on his way rejoicing. So this is the biblical claim that they say how the gospel got to Ethiopia through the Ethiopian eunuch during the 1st century. Now, the oldest physical evidence we have of the book of Acts, where the eunuch is mentioned, is Papyrus 45. Wow. Early mid-3rd century, 200 to 250 CE. Look how late that is. So the earliest known reference to the Ethiopian eunuch does not come from a 1st century source. That means the idea that the Ethiopian eunuch traveled to Ethiopia was not attested or recognized in surviving sources until the 3rd century Common Era.
So wait, we're talking 200 years later. That's exactly crazy.
So for the church fathers living at that time period, what they're doing is examining the text and backdating it to the time period that these things that they think would occur. So scholars date the Gospel of Mark to 6570 CE. But that's based on the textual analysis of manuscripts P37 and P45, using a 3rd to 4th century text to determine dates for a 1st century account. Whoa. That's what you call backdating. So here we see the Gospel of Mark, 6570 CE. But in order to get that, they had to examine these papyruses of P137 and P45, which contain the book of Acts in the 3rd century Common Era, in order to even give a date for the 1st century Common Era.
Whoa.
However, the earliest external mention of the Gospel of Mark itself does not appear until the 2nd and 3rd century Common Era. Now, here is a map showing Rome's authority over Alexandria, Egypt, where all this starts. Right. So here's a map of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, and in the purple, you see the extent of the Roman Empire in Northern Africa. And here you see this map shows how Alexandria, Egypt, was under the control of the Roman Empire during the 4th century Common Era. So Rome has total control and authority over Alexandria, Egypt, which in return they'll have control over the Alexandrian Coptic Church. Now here are some sources from the 4th century historian describing contemporary Egypt. Ammianus Marcellinus, chapter 22, 16:2, it states, Alexandria, the chief city, is distinguished from its size, wealth, and for being what? Under Roman administration. The next verse states, Egypt, long since subject to Roman power, is governed by prefect of the Equestrians order. Now you have Socrates, Scholasticus, Church History, 5th century. It states the emperor Constantius sent Cyrenius, the general, with soldiers to Alexandria to depose Athanasius. When the imperial troops entered the church at night, Athanasius escaped Constantius, then appointed George of Cappadocia as bishop. So here we see Constantius, who appointed George and deposed Athanasius, showing Roman authority over Alexandria.
Wow.
So the Roman emperor appointed and removing bishops in Alexandria confirms Rome's political control. Another 5th century historian describes 4th century Rome in Egypt. Sozomen, Ecclesiastic Histories 334. The emperor Constantius commanded that Athanasius be expelled from Alexandria. Officials of the emperor arrived and soldiers seized the church, installing George in the episcopate. Roman state forcefully controls the church in Alexandria.
Wow.
Evidence of Rome governance. Anastasia himself report Rome's authority. Anastasia Apology, AD Constantium 27, it states, this is Anastasia, this is the first account of him talking, I was driven from my church by the command of your officers. Athanasius personally acknowledged Roman state authority over Alexandria. Now keep in mind, Athanasius, he's the big dog. He's the head honcho in charge. He's like the Pope of Alexandria, Egypt. But as you see here, he's being controlled by the Romans.
So let me just.
So this is evident that. Go ahead.
So you mean to tell me the Romans are the ones that put Jesus to death? You know, at the Jews' request, perhaps you could phrase it that way. Right. And they run the whole Roman Catholic Church.
Yes,
they lead the way today, right?
Right. They have total authority.
Wow,
over the Church of Alexandria, and you know they're the Western Orthodox Church. They're the Roman Catholic Church. You know, and the crazy thing is, all this is based off theological belief. Now the Romans are more concrete in thinking. They're more like, you know, like when the Jews brought Jesus to Pilate. Pilate was like, yo, he ain't do no real crime. He ain't kill nobody. He ain't shoot nobody. They worried about stuff like that. They're not worried about theological issues.
Yeah.
So Rome having authority of these churches, they're not logged into the theological debates. They're just logged in to make sure everything is under control.
Right. Let me just, I don't want to take you away from your great breakdown, man. This is so wonderful. But you know, when you read the New Testament, right, you make a good point. Paul is saying when you're in Rome, do as the Romans do. Paul is saying pay your taxes, right? Jesus is saying when they says, do you follow the authority? Jesus says, hand me a penny, right? He says, whose inscription is that? Oh, it's Caesar. Okay, give Caesar's thing to Caesar, God's things to God. Also, right, in the Gospels, it's almost this whole commandment about not fighting back, because you know a lot of the Jews were apocalyptic, right? So they thought the end of the world was coming, right? The zealots, right? But the New Testament is telling them basically to behave. So when you read the New Testament, it's almost like it's written in a way that favors Rome, right?
Exactly, because it's coming from Rome.
Isn't it Romans chapter 13 where Paul says to obey your earthly masters because they're from God, right? So I always wonder, why would Paul say that the Romans were from God?
Because
right?
Paul is in bed with the Romans.
Oh my.
Yeah, Paul had Roman citizenship. You know, you can't be a Jew and have Roman citizenship. You know what I mean? So Paul having Roman citizenship is questionable, and he's a free Roman citizen, so that's questionable alone right there, because in order to have that, you got to be tied into the Idumeans, the Herod. You got to be tied into the Herod family, because those were the ones who got free citizenship under Caesar.
Right. And as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this subject, but I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll let you go. Sorry. But when I went to Rome, right, and I'm going to Greece next, do you know what kind of money Paul would have had to send a letter to get these letters? Because when I was there, these places are far apart. Like when you go to Jerusalem, the places that Jesus would have to travel within his 3-year ministry, they are so far apart to travel on a camel. You know what I mean? But anyway,
that's true.
Paul would have had to had Roman connections in order to get these letters all the way out to Thessalonica and Antioch, Greece.
Paul basically was an Edomite. He was a Herodian, because the Herodians during the time of Antipater got Roman citizenship under Caesar, and the Caesar gave Antipater's family free Roman citizenship, and Antipater's son is Herod. So for Paul to be claiming Roman citizenship, that's questionable.
Right.
But that's a whole other topic for another time.
And he's saying that God put the Romans in place and obey your earthly masters. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Okay,
he's working with the ops. He's working even when he went down to Jerusalem and James told him what not to do and what to do, and he went and said something different. You know what I mean? Abstain from strangled blood and flesh and stuff like that. He basically was telling him, like, yo, don't eat meat. That's what James was telling Paul. Yo, this is the rule. This is how we doing it. Boom, boom, boom. Paul go out there and teach something totally opposite.
Okay, very good.
All right, so now we moving up to Alexander the First of Alexandria of Egypt. And what's important about him, he is the 19th patriarch of Alexandria. Now, the 19th meaning that the first one was Saint Mark. He was the first patriarch, and then you have the lineage, the pedigree coming on down. But keep in mind, Saint Mark is a pen name. So this whole patriarch is based off a false narrative until we get to an actual living person who claims to be a patriarch coming down outside of Mark. So now we have the 19th patriarch, Alexandria. He was the leader of the opposition of Arianism at the First Council of Nicaea. He is regarded as a pope by the Coptic Orthodox Church, but not by the Catholic Church. See that?
Yeah.
An example of this would be Orthodox Islam do not recognize the Nation of Islam. Orthodox Judaism do not recognize the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. They're looked at as non-credible. That's the same way the Catholic Church looked at the Coptic Orthodox Church as non-credible. That's why Rome wasn't respecting Anatasius, kicking Anatasius, deposing Anatasius, and putting up a whole nother pope. They ain't had no respect for the Alexandrian Church. So now, Alexander ordains Athanasius as successor. So Athanasius, Apologies, Contra Arrhenius, 6 and 7, it states, Alexander, when near death, called me to him and designated me to the people as his successor. So this is just some sources showing that Alexander ordained Athanasius as successor. And after the death of Alexander, the bishop of Egypt and Libya with the clergy, and many of the ladies urged me to accept the episcopate. Socrates, Scholasticus, Church History, chapter 2, verse 11, upon the death of Alexandria, the people assembled and the bishop elected Athanasius as bishop for Alexander, had signified him as worthy. So these are just a couple of sources showing the succession or the ordination of Athanasius. Now, how did Christianity reach Ethiopia? This is where it all starts. First, let's see Athanasius' stance on Christianity. Athanasius lived during the 4th, 3rd century Common Era. Athanasius' source against the Arian Book 1, the Son is of the same essence as the Father. So he believes that the theology of Jesus Christ and the Father being one. Church History, chapter 1, verse 15, Athanasius succeeded Alexander in the bishopric of Alexandria. Church Fathers.
Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Could I stop you because I want people to really kind of grasp. So I think Constantine he has his moment around 313 or so, right? And I
Correct.
believe at the Council of Nicaea, he had basically put out the order. He wanted them to, because with Arianism, they thought it's like the Jehovah Witnesses. They believe that it's the Father, and then the Father has the Son, which is Jesus, and then the Holy Spirit. It wasn't until 325, the Council of Nicaea, that they made the determination of the Trinity. So for people that believe in the Trinity today, it's very important for you to understand that that was not a first century 70 CE thinking or process. That came later in 325 AD, roughly. If you want to expound on it, you can.
Yeah, basically, the Council of Nicaea was basically a theological conference about the divinity of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Is he the Father? Is he the Son? Does he have a divine nature? Is he natural? That's what this whole thing is about. That's what all these council meetings was about, the divinity of Jesus Christ. Right. So, Church History, chapter 2, verse 19, Athanasius defended the doctrine established at Nicaea. So he was a defender of the Council of Nicaea, and he was against Arianism. Because Arianism opposed the views that Jesus was a divine person. Arianism was basically saying he was a natural man. You know what I mean? So, in a nutshell. So now, Ecclesiastic History's book 1, Athanasius, the most steadfast defender of the Nicene faith. So we see Athanasius commissions Frumentius. Now here's where we get into the heart of Ethiopia. So Frumentius is the one we need to take focus on. Socrates, Church History, chapter 1, verse 19, Athanasius consecrates Frumentius bishop, judging no one more suitable for the office. Rufinus, Ecclesiastics, History, book 1, chapters 9 and 10, it states, Athanasius, having examined Frumentius and finding him worthy, ordained him bishop and sent him back to preach the gospel to that nation. That nation, referencing Ethiopia. How did Frumentius get to Ethiopia? Source, Athanasius, Orations Against the Arians, chapter 1, verse 21. The Son is of the same essence as the Father. Okay, this is some more of his beliefs as far as believing the Father is one with the Son. Source, Athanasius on Incarnation 54, Athanasius' life of Atoni, how do you pronounce that? He became man so that we might become God. So these are some of the quotes and theological beliefs that Athanasius held. So I just want to throw that in there real quick. Now coming back to how did Frumentius get to Ethiopia? Ecclesiastical Histories, book 1, chapter 9, it states, the vessel in which they sailed was attacked by the people of that place. All on board were slain except the 2 youths, Adasius and Frumentius. They were taken to the king of Ethiopians, who, seeing their abilities, placed them in charge of royal affairs. Here's another source of how Frumentius got to Ethiopia, Socrates, Church Histories 119. As they were returning from India, their ship put in at a certain port. The barbarians slew all but the boys, Frumentius and Adasius, who were taken to the king of Ethiopians and made members of his household. So there's a couple sources just showing how Frumentius made his way to Ethiopia. So Frumentius was the first bishop of Axum. He is credited with bringing Christianity to the Axumite kingdom, which was a major trading area for northern Africa. It is northern Ethiopia today. He was a Greek that was born in Tyre. So now we come to Izana becomes king of Axum. Now, this is how Christianity becomes established in Ethiopia through Frumentius, through Izana. Ecclesiastical Histories, chapter 1:9, it states, son of previous king, young ruler under the guidance of his mother and Frumentius. Frumentius returns to Axum as bishop, early 4th century. Ecclesiastic Histories, 1 chapter 10, chapter 1 verse 10, begins instructing King Ezana and organizing the Christian community. Ezana converts to Christianity, early 4th century. Ezana inscriptions, Socrates Scholasticus, chapter 1, verse 19. The first Ethiopian king to embrace the faith, Christianity becomes the state religion. So this sequence of events illustrate a clear line of Roman authority over Alexandria, Egypt. We see Alexander the first appointing Athanasius as bishop, Athanasius ordaining Frumentius, and Frumentius in return ordaining Ezana, forming a chain of successions that ultimately trace back to Roman authority. Remember, the Catholic Church looks at the Alexandrian Church of St. Mark as non-credible. And it could be they look at them as non-credible because they probably knew that St. Mark was a pen name and not a real person. Now, Frumentius was a Phoenician Christian missionary and the first bishop of Axum who brought Christianity to the kingdom of Axum. And for people who don't know, Axum is a kingdom in Ethiopia. So we're in Ethiopia. We're showing you how Christianity entered Ethiopia through Frumentius, through Ezana. They also began to teach Christianity in the region. Later, Frumentius traveled to Alexandria, Egypt, where he appealed to have a bishop appointed and missionaries priests sent south to Axum. Therefore, he was appointed bishop and established the church in Ethiopia, converting many local people as well as the king. So then converted and baptized King Ezana, who built many churches and spread Christianity throughout Ethiopia. Frumentius established the first monastery of Ethiopia called Debaselema in Duga Tamian. And here's a picture of the monastery. The oldest monastery in Ethiopia comes from Frumentius. The people called Frumentius the revealer of light and father of peace. He became the first Abinu, a title given to the head of the Ethiopian church. That's equivalent to Pope in the Hebrew. That's equivalent to rabbi. So here you have Ezana of Axum lived from the 4th century to the mid-4th century, 320 to 360 Common Era. Ezana is important as he is the country's first king to embrace Christianity and make it what? The official religion. So here's a brief history of Ethiopian Axumite gods pre-Christianity. So before the Ethiopians acknowledged Christianity, what were they practicing and what were they acknowledging and what were they worshiping? Ecclesiastic Histories, Book 1, Chapter 9, it states, they worshipped a god of war whom they called Ares, and the king claimed to be his son. The Ezana inscriptions, it says, by the might of Marim, who has made me king. Cosmos in the couplets, Christians typography, typograph, Book 2. The king attributed his victories to a deity interpreted by the Greek as Ares. So the god Maher or Maherim was a South Semitic god of the Axumites. He was the son of the main god Ashtar, and his counterpart was Be-Her, god of the sea. He was the deity of war comparable to Mars or Ares in the ancient Greek. So these are just some deities that the people of Ethiopia in the Axumite kingdom was acknowledging and worshiping prior to Christianity. So let me scroll down. Here's an inscription. This is called the Ezana stone inscription, where he gives his glory and dedications to his gods during the time of warfare. And this inscription is translated in 3 languages. So we have 3 translations of the Ezana inscriptions. You have it in Greek, Ge'ez, and Sabian. And in the inscriptions, you see the gods he called upon. I have highlighted here. In the inscriptions, Ezana, son of Elah, Amida, king of the Axumite, king of kings, son of the unconquered God, Aries. I have consecrated this stela and dedicated to heaven, the earth, and the invincible Aries who begot me. So this is King Izana acknowledging in the Greek God Aries, but in his native it was Maharim. In the Ge'ez translation, may the might of the Lord of heaven, who has made me king, who reign for all eternity, invisible, cause that no enemy can resist me, that no enemy may follow me, by the might of the Lord of all. In the Sabian translation, it says, the Lord strong and brave, the Lord mighty in battle, by the power of the Lord and by the grace of Jesus Christ, the Son of the Lord, the victorious, in whom I believe. So in this translation, now you see his conversion and his belief in Jesus Christ prior to when he was believing in some of the native local deities of his indigenous roots. So here we see King Izana calling on his pagan god Aries, aka Maharim, before calling on his new god Christ. So Izana conversion to Christianity, Ecclesiastical Histories, Book 1, Chapter 10, Athanasius consecrated Frumentius bishop, and he returned to the Ethiopians, converting King Izana to faith of Christ. Socrates, Church History, Chapter 119, Frumentius, now bishop, led the young King Izana to embrace the Christian faith. Izana stone, Axumite inscription, by the grace of God, I, King Izana, have conquered all in Christ our Lord. So now we see the conversion of Izana and the Axumite people believing in the Christian God Christ prior to they was calling on their native indigenous gods. Now we see clearly that the King Izana has converted to Christianity, calling upon Christ, and no longer using his native indigenous god Maharim. Now, we come to the translation of the Gospels from Greek to Ge'ez. So we already showed you how the tradition came from Ethiopia. From Alexandria of Egypt coming to Ethiopia. Now we're going to show you the translation. How did these Greek Gospels get translated into the Ethiopian native language of Ge'ez? So now, the translation of the Gospel from Greek to Ge'ez. In about 347 CE, Common Era, Athanasius ordained Frumentius bishop and commissioned him to initiate the cultural adaptation of Greek Christianity's biblical liturgical texts to Ethiopic symbols and language.
Wow.
Ethiopian traditions credit him with what? The first Ge'ez translation of the New Testament. So here we're seeing how the New Testament is coming into Ethiopia by a man named Frumentius, who crowned King Izana, and now he's translating the New Testament into Ge'ez. This is how the Ethiopians got the New Testament, from Frumentius. And they're called the Garma Gospels. The time period is the late 4th to the late 7th century. These are your oldest Ethiopian Gospels you have, period. They're called the Garma Gospels or the Garima Gospels 1 and 2. The oldest one is from 390 Common Era. See that? The Garima Gospels are 3 ancient Ge'ez manuscripts containing all 4 canonical Gospels. So if Athanasius appointed Frumentius in 347 CE to translate the New Testament into Ge'ez, and the earliest Ethiopian New Testament manuscript we possess are the Garma Gospels 2, which is dated to around 390 CE, then Frumentius would have completed his translations roughly 43 years earlier. This makes it highly plausible that Frumentius' work directly influenced the Garima Gospels of Ethiopia, because he was already translating by the time these Gospels came about. Now this is in the Garima Gospels. Now this is to show Romans' authority or Romans' influence in the Ethiopia Garima Gospels. Here's a depiction of the evangelist of a portrait of Saint Mark from the Garima Gospels. So here we see a depiction of Saint Mark in the Garima Gospels. It's important to note that the name Saint Mark first appears in Eusebian's quote in the church. It comes from Eusebian's quote of Papias, Church History 339. late 3rd, 4th century Common Era, highlighting Rome influence presence in the Garima Gospel. So if you have a depiction of St. Mark in the Ethiopian book, that shows you the influence coming from the Coptic Church, and in return, the overseer, Rome. So now, here we have a cross comparison of Greek Ge'ez contemporary time period with the so-called Codex Sinaiticus. Now, the so-called Codex Sinaiticus is supposedly to be dated from 325 to 360 Common Era. The Garima Gospels, the Garima Gospels in Ge'ez is around 390 Common Era. So if you was to date this, the Codex Sinaiticus would predate the Ethiopian Garima Gospel, the New Testament. But here's the catcher. Look at this. The Codex Sinaiticus, which includes the both Old and New Testament, predates the Garima Gospels by about 50 years. This means that Greek manuscripts of the Old and New Testaments were already circulating in the time of the Garima Gospels were being translated into Ge'ez. But here's the catcher with the Septuagint. I mean, with this the Codex Sinaiticus. There is no historian from the 3rd, 4th century Common Era coming down that speaks not of the Codex Sinaiticus. The Codex Sinaiticus is not mentioned in no 3rd, 2nd century historian from that time period that ever spoke of the Codex Sinaiticus. When you research the Codex Sinaiticus, you're going to find out that the Codex Sinaiticus wasn't discovered until 1913. The Codex Sinaiticus wasn't discovered until 1913. 1913, really? Yeah. And that's a whole nother story for another time. But the Codex Sinaiticus was discovered in 1913, and there is no sources, no evidence of any historian speaking of the Codex Sinaiticus from the time it was produced in the so-called 4th century Common Era. Now you have the 9 saints. Who are the 9 saints? The major contribution in the missionary field in Ethiopia was that of the missionaries who are known in Ethiopia tradition as the 9 saints. These men, the 9 saints, came to the ancient city, capital city of Axum about 480 Common Era. And we well received by the Emperor Ella Amida and by the inhabitants of the city. The most outstanding figure among the 9 saints were the priests Makael, Panteleon, and Afsi, and Yishak or Isaac. As their names indicate, they came from different parts of the what? Eastern Roman Empire. Again, showing you Rome's authority, showing you Rome's influence. They were educated and learned coming out of there, such as Constantinople and Syria. These priests were all adherent of the same Orthodox faith. Now keep in mind, all this is a theological fight and argument and discussion and dispute with these church fathers and these Orthodox churches. However, it seems that they left the countries of their origin because of the persecution by the Christian Roman emperor, who was an adherent supporter of what Oriental Orthodox Christians considered Greek Roman Council of Chalcedon, held in 451 AD. The gathering at Chalcedon rejected the ancient Orthodox doctrine concerning the nature of Christ and adopted the two-nature notion of Pope Leo of Rome. So these fights, these early fights that you're hearing about in these council meetings, these fights were based off the theological understanding of the divinity of Jesus Christ. I'm talking about they're having wars whether or not Jesus is one with the Father or not. That's what these council meetings was about. And they got real nasty in some of these council meetings. So now you have Pope.
So can I stop you for a second?
Yes, sir.
So it's not Jesus stating his nature that the church is following. They're looking to these church fathers who are actually fighting, and they're creating these schisms based on their own interpretations, and that's how these religions develop.
Exactly, because all this is based off the Christology doctrine. That's what they're arguing. And there's three theological beliefs. You got the I don't want to give up too much of my part 2 presentation, but I'm going to get heavy into the theological debates of how these arguments really came about, stemming from the Christology doctrine. But we're going to get into that probably further. I don't want to give too much of that right now. You know what I mean? But Pope Leo I. Now look, according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's own account, Syrian monks, the 9 saints, reached Axum in the 5th century. They are credited with translating scripture into Ge'ez and launching a native Christian literary and monastery tradition. So they're just letting you know that these monks came and started translating some of the scriptures as well.
Can I stop you? I'm sorry for 1 second.
That's fine.
Bishop 777 says the church was setting up the narrative for Yeshua based on false narratives.
So, nah, he'll have to source that. But like I say, these disputes was based off the divinity of Jesus Christ, stemming from the Council of Nicaea, and then from that point forward, that's when all these other councils came about, and these disputes and these different branches of groups took place. Now, Yeshua, the Hebrews, the Zealots, the Nazarenes, and they have nothing to do with this. This is all the politics of Rome being influenced and pushed upon the people of Alexandria and then further into Ethiopia. It's a theological war. It's theological warfare. It's a theological debate. It's a war for the mind and spirit. So that's what it was during the early centuries, 3rd, 4th century. That's what's going on. So now, scholarly overview refers to the arrival of these Syrian monks 450-500 Common Era, their role in establishing monasticism in Ethiopia, founding churches and monasteries, and translating biblical and other Christian literatures into Ge'ez. So here we have references showing that these 9 saints who came from the east of the Roman Empire, who was being persecuted, came into Ethiopia and started translating some of these biblical texts. These 9 saints came after Frumentius. Frumentius was already translating Greek biblical texts into Ge'ez. No ancient Ethiopian codex exists that contain all 81 books in a single manuscript. Scholars emphasize that surviving manuscripts included only portions of the Canon rather than its entirety. Researchers identifies second oldest Ethiopian manuscript in existence in HMML's archives. This manuscript, HMML 6977, dates prior to the Ptolemaic era in Ethiopia, which began in 1270 CE, and contains the books of Job and Daniel, as well as 2 homilies. Now, the Ethiopian Bible. Now, when we come to the complete Ethiopian Bible, which came much later, it has 81 to 88 books, 46 Old Testament, 35 New Testament. But check this out. According to a new release titled Full Ethiopian Biblical Canon, published in its entirety for the first time, the 81-book canon was published on March 19, 2022 by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahidi Church in collaboration with the Bible Society of Ethiopia. So the Ethiopian Bible didn't get its complete full codex until 2022. There was never a single fully compiled ancient Ethiopian Bible. Most Old Testament texts were translated during the post-Axumite literary period, 7th to 12th century Common Era, long after Frumentius. So the oldest Ethiopian biblical text, which is the Garima Gospels, is no older than the 4th century. So all other biblical texts translated into Ge'ez, whether it's Aramaic, Syriac, or Hebrew, was done after the 4th century Common Era. And here we have a map showing a time period of these texts. The so-called Codex Sinaitica was supposed to be written in 325 to 360 Common Era. Then you have Frumentius translating Greek into Ge'ez, the New Testament in 347 Common Era. After that, you have the Garima Gospels, the oldest Ethiopian Christian text, started from 390 to 570 Common Era. Then you have the 9 saints translating scriptures into Ge'ez within the 6th century Common Era. Then you have the second oldest Ethiopian manuscript 1270 CE Common Era, and then you have the complete Ethiopian Bible, the first canon ever compiled in 2022 Common Era. Now, I'm going to show how the Roman Catholic Church tradition and architecture influenced the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The link between the Egyptian, Coptic, and Ethiopian churches having thus been established, Frumentius returned to Ethiopia to set up his episcopal see and erect churches. So here's an episcopal see, which is bishop seat of authority. That's what the episcopal see is, the bishop seat of authority. When you see the Pope sitting down on that chair, he's sitting in his episcopal. Now, the word see means properly the official see or throne or a bishop. This see, which is the earliest of the bishop's insignia. Episcopal see is the area of a bishop's ecclesiastic jurisdiction. Ecclesiastic jurisdiction is a jurisdiction by church leaders over other church leaders and over the laity. What is jurisdiction? The official power to make legal decisions and judgments. The episcopal see of the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is known as what? The Holy See or Apostolic See, claiming papal supremacy. So right off the bat, Rome is claiming supremacy over all the other churches. Rome functioned as the chief episcopal authority and exercised jurisdiction over the Church of Alexandria in Egypt, as demonstrated in the previous cited source, Socrates' Ecclesiastical Histories 2:15-16, where it states, we see explicit instance of external jurisdiction being asserted. Verse 15. Emperor Constantius dispatched the general Cyrenius with troops to Alexandria to remove Athanasius from office. When the imperial troops entered the church at night, Athanasius fled. Constantius then installed George of Cappadocia as bishop. So now, these events clearly illustrate an external government power centered in Rome. Imperial authority exercising decisive control over episcopal leadership in Alexandria. So here we see the seat of the cathedral, the Bishop of Rome, in the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran. Here you have the papal throne, the seat of authority. Now look at this. Now here is where you see the Roman influence on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, right here. Here we see the episcopal ordination of Albino Lucas Teshome was held on Sunday, February 11th, 2024. This is last year. But look at how they're masquerading like Romans. That look like the Pope. You throw some white skin on there, you would know the difference. They look like Catholic priests. So now you have the episcopal ordination, the Ethiopians doing the exact same thing you see the Romans doing. But it's stemming from the Church of Alexandria, the Coptic Church, but it all leads back to Rome. Here you see the episcopal seat set up with the bishop at the head, referring to this picture right here. If you zoom in closely, you see the episcopal seat, you see the bishops, and you see the people leading the procession. So, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tehuidi Church. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tehuidi Church dates back to the acceptance of Christianity by the Kingdom of Axum in 330 Common Era. So here you have a picture of St. John, the highest ranking basilica seat of the Bishop of Rome, the highest ranking. They're showing you their authority again and their supremacy. Now here's a cross comparison of the architect, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and St. John's Latin Basilica. And you see the cross comparison architect. You see where the influence of where the Ethiopians got it from, coming from the headquarters. St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, the largest Catholic church building in the world. Again, Romans showing you their authority, showing you their supremacy. Now here again, you see comparing architect, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is compared to St. Peter's Basilica, and you see the cross comparison. You see where the Ethiopian got the influence from. Now you can see how the Ethiopian Orthodox Tehuti Church is a product of Roman influence. You have Ethiopian Orthodox masquerading as Catholic popes. You see the Pope with the fish hat on, and as you zoom in, you see the brother right here, the Ethiopian with the fish hat on, mimicking and masquerading what the Pope is doing, showing you where he got it from, showing you that all roads lead to Rome. Here's the Episcopal consecration of Bishop Tesfaye, and look, they look like Romans. If we scroll down, we see the Episcopal consecration happening in Rome, and you see the same thing. You see where the Ethiopians got it from. And here's a side-by-side picture showing you the Ethiopian Episcopal consecration and Rome Episcopal consecration, and you see where the Ethiopians got it from. All roads lead back to Rome. Patriarch, the word is derived from the Greek meaning chief or family. Father, according to the church tradition, the patriarch was founded in 42 AD by who? The pen name, the fabricator, Mark the Evangelist. It was the center from which Christianity spread throughout all of Egypt. So this is based on a false narrative. These brothers right here in this picture are following a pen name as their first patriarch and bishop of Alexandria, Egypt. Here's the Pope, Bishop of Rome, as head of the Roman Catholic Church. Here's the Abinu, a title given to the head of the Ethiopian Church. We see the Roman influence in the Abinu Church, in the Ethiopian Church. We see the Europeanized versions of Mary and Jesus within the Ethiopian Church, showing you more of Roman influence within the church with the picture and artistry. And then from here, you just have a list of Abinus, which is the equivalent of bishops or patriarchs carrying the pedigree of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So a brief summary, a conclusion of what we spoke on. First, that Alexandria, Egypt was not an independent entity, but under Roman authority. Two, the name Saint Mark is a pen name and a fictional character and was added to the text in the 2nd and 3rd century. Three, there is no evidence that the Ethiopian eunuch brought the gospel to Ethiopia. King Izana of Axum never referenced a story of a 1st century Ethiopian eunuch. 4, Christianity was introduced to Ethiopia by Frumentius in the 4th century Common Era. 5, the Garima Gospels, the oldest Ethiopian Christian texts, were translated from Greek to Ge'ez in the 4th century. 6, there is no single ancient Ethiopian Bible as a single codex until the Ethiopian Bible was canonized in 2022. And 7, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tehuti Church shows significant Roman influence through its episcopal structure, apostolic successions, and biblical traditions, from Rome's authority over the Church of Alexandria to the ordination of bishops like Athanasius and Frumentius. The Ethiopian Church's hierarchy, liturgy, and scriptural translation reflects a strong connection to Roman ecclesiastical authority and Greek Christian tradition, rather than an independent Ethiopian Bible or church existing between the 1st and 4th century Common Era. There I land my plane, King.
Wow, that's so amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, that was a wealth of knowledge. I can tell you put a lot of time into that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, when you do something you like, it's easy work, you know?
Yeah, so basically there's no way possible if Acts was dated as you expressed, there's no way possible that the Ethiopian Bible is the first. Wow.
No. The Ethiopian Bible is a product of Rome. It's a product of Rome. Now you have other books that came from the Ethiopian Bible that you don't find in the King James version, but those scripts would have been translated from the non-saints who would have came with other biblical texts. They started translating biblical literature into Ge'ez. So that would be a reference to show how these other biblical texts came about in the Ethiopian Bible that you don't see in the King James.
Well, I think a thing that's important to note is that they were already under Roman control before any of the Gospels were ever written.
Right. Now, the control that they was under wasn't a physical control. It was a mental control. It was a theological control, because Frumentius is bringing a theological belief into Ethiopia. So by him converting King Izana, he won the war right there. So Rome didn't have to come from Rome to go battle the Ethiopians. They won through the theological doctrine, because they converted these Ethiopians who had a native indigenous god prior to Christianity. King Izana stopped all that, took on the Christ doctrine, and then from there on, you see Christianity spreading throughout Ethiopia until today. We see Christianity alive and well in Ethiopia, all stemming from Frumentius bringing it from Alexandria of Egypt, all stemming from Rome.
Do you think that Christianity would be as large as it is today if Constantine hadn't converted?
If Constantine hadn't converted, there probably wouldn't be nobody alive. That was the reason why they had these council meetings, because they were spilling blood over the divinity of Jesus Christ. I'm talking about they was having full-fledged wars over this thing. That's like me and you having a disagreement about Jesus Christ, and then we go to war and bloodshed and families are getting killed just based off of theological belief. That's why this is theological warfare. The warfare is of the mind. You know what I mean? So with that, Ethiopia has been conquered since the time of Frumentius, because Rome got their theological doctrine in the minds of the Africans in Ethiopia during the 4th century Common Era. So today, hook, line, and sinker, they headlong in.
So there's often like a big division amongst Christians when it comes to the nature of Jesus. We see it today, like Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is God's son, whereas other segments of the faith believe that in the Trinity, Father, Son, Spirit are equal, right?
Right. Well, that stems from the early 1st, 2nd century beliefs about, well, to be honest, it really started from the Gospel of John, because the Gospel of John is the only gospel that speaks of the Father and Son being unified. The other Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, don't speak of that. The only place you see Jesus talking about being one with the Father is in the Gospel of John. So the Gospel of John is the root and the foundation of the theological belief of the Christology of these churches. It's all in the book of John. The book of John is the foundation for the whole idea of Jesus being one with the Father. Does Jesus have a divine nature or not? It's coming from the book of John.
Right. Now, a lot of Bible scholars believe Mark was the first book, then Matthew, then Luke, then John. So let's put that on the table. When you start with the book of Mark, Jesus is at his baptism. He's getting baptized. He's an adult. There's no birth narrative. So then if you think that Matthew is written next, then in Matthew, you get the whole, he's born from a virgin. You get the baby narrative. You also get the whole Christmas baby narrative in Luke, right? Mm-hmm. And then they say John is written last of the 4. And that's where John, whoever wrote John, is taking Jesus all the way back to the beginning and saying in the beginning was the Word, which is synonymous to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Right. They're trying to put Jesus equal to God, right?
Right.
Is that the drift? Okay.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, they basically constructed the story, because when you look at some of these early papyruses, like I showed earlier, the earliest papyruses found, they're fragments. So how do you take fragments and create a whole narrative? So the book of Acts, it's a good portion of, like P137, it's a good portion of the book of Acts that they got, but it's not the whole complete codex of the book of Acts. So whatever is missing in the book of Acts, they had to construct that over the course of time. The same thing with the other gospels. They had to construct and add and take away or according to how they see fit, because they that's Rome. They in charge. They can do what they want. As sad as it is.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the Apostle Paul was teaching the same faith or gospel as Jesus?
First off, no, I don't rock with Paul at all. Paul. First off, Paul was a traitor to the Israelites. You know what I mean? He was against the Jews. He was persecuting them. He co-signed the death of Stephen. You know what I mean? He was bound to the Jews who persecute him. So I don't rock with Paul because he never met the Messiah in the flesh. You know what I mean? So he can't be no apostle first and foremost. He never met him. And then he met him on the road to Damascus. I don't fall for none of that. You know what I'm saying? Because James, the brother of Jesus, is right next door to the Mashiach, Yeshua. James right there the whole time. So why would everybody be following Paul when James was right there the whole time, and then he was the one who was the leader of the church after Yeshua left?
Right.
The headquarters was in Jerusalem with James. He was the head honcho in charge. So everything that Paul is doing should be James doing. We should be holding the book of James and be talking about James' doctrine instead of Paul's doctrine.
The Nazarenes, okay.
The Nazarenes, because when you look at the Nazarenes, they was totally opposed Rome. They ain't rock with Rome at all. So there's no way Jesus Christ would have returned to Paul, the one who was persecuting his people. He would have came to his brother like, all right, I'm the spirit. This is what we're going to do. I need y'all to boom, 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 boom. You know what I mean? So that whole story about Paul on the road to Damascus, oh, that's a fabrication. It's an agenda.
So let me give this to you here. In the book of Mark chapter 10, also Matthew chapter 19, a young man walks up to Jesus. He says, what do I have to do to have everlasting life? I think Jesus told him, basically, keep the commandments, right? He was a rich man.
Right.
And so Jesus, he said, I've done all these things since birth. And Jesus told him, go away and sell all your possessions, and then you can have treasures in heaven, right?
Right.
So Jesus is saying, keep the commandments. If you go to the writings of Paul is saying that the commandments are a taskmaster, right? Basically, right? And not to really keep the commandments, but to follow Jesus. So it's not the exact same teaching. The other thing is in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus says, do not call anyone rabbi or master. But when you go to Paul's writings, he's setting up churches.
That's right.
Deuteronomy, you know, he's
ordaining
bishop.
He's doing all types of things.
so it's not the same gospel.
It's not. Paul didn't follow nothing. He didn't fall in line with what James was doing in Jerusalem. When he met them in Jerusalem, he gave them like, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we follow. This is what you teach. Abstain from meat. Abstain from this. Don't do this. Don't do that. You know what I mean? And he went out and did the opposite.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I got a brother by the name of Malachi Maccabee. He's an expert in Paul. He's a scholar in Paul. That's one brother you may want to interview in time to come. Yeah, he's a walking book when it comes to Paul. But Paul definitely is a traitor to the Nazarenes. He's an agent of Rome. And it's funny how that his writings are older than the Gospels. How is that?
Right.
And he's the same one that was persecuting the Jews. And he has a change of heart, and all of a sudden, he's one with the same zealots, the same Nazarenes. Even in the book of Acts, it said the Jews wanted to kill him. They were like, no, we ain't falling for that. That's like slave master just hung daddy yesterday, then wake up and comes to us and say, hey, I had a vision of Jesus. I have a change of heart. You my brother now. But they just hung daddy yesterday. We ain't falling for that. Off with his head. That's how the Jews was, who wasn't falling for Paul. But those who sympathize are those who we would consider today a house nigga. Yes, a master. Yes, a boss. Anybody who followed Paul would be considered what we would consider today a house Negro.
Okay. All right. I think actually it's in the writings of Paul where he says he went and he met with James and he profited nothing at all, right?
Yeah, exactly.
James the Just, he basically took over the church or the movement when Jesus was killed, right?
Right. That's supposed to be the brother of Yeshua. So it's saying like, how are you going to come to the head honcho and disregard what the head honcho, who was the brother of the Mashiach, say, and go out and preach something totally different? You know what I mean? So
now, here's the thing. It seems like when you read the Gospels, Jesus is often saying, I only came for the lost tribe of Israel, right? He says that. He says it in certain cases, right?
Right, because you know if you understand the historicity as far as the lineage of the people of the book, starting from Abraham being called out, then through thy seed Isaac, and then through Jacob and the 12 tribes, and then from the 12 tribes, he raised up Moshe. Moshe leads the people, and then so it's showing you one lineage of one people coming down the line. So when Yeshua comes on the scene, he says, "I'm coming for the house of Israel." He's coming to redeem his people because his people at the time was lost to the ways of the Creator. It was following the Gentile ways, those Hellenized, following the Roman, Greek gods. All type of stuff was going on during the first century, as far as the theological belief of the people of Israel.
But after Paul received his conversion on the road to Damascus, he basically focused on the Gentiles, which were non-Jews, correct?
Right, because if you notice, you had flights of Israelites always coming into Egypt. You had Abraham went into Egypt, Moses was in Egypt. When Jesus was being hunted for, he fled in Egypt. Why didn't Paul have none of his ministries in Africa? All his ministries is in Europe. He don't have no ministries going into Egypt or Ethiopia, in the heart of Africa. All his ministry is going into Europe. That's a tell-all right there. What about the African people? Don't they need some gospel? Don't they need some saving?
Right.
You know what I mean? And then he said, "I'm gonna send you out into the the 4 corners of the earth." We just see the journey of Paul just going up to Antioch and Rome and up in there. We don't see them going into Africa. To put it blunt, we see him going up into Europe because he comes from there. He's part of that lineage. He's spreading. Right. He's spreading something that is totally opposed of what the Nazarenes of the first century was about.
Yeah. So when you see Paul saying, "When I'm in Rome, I do as the Romans do," he's promoting, paying the taxes. He's saying that God has put the Romans in place and that you should be obedient to your earthly masters, as into the Lord. What do you think is happening here?
Yeah, he's referring to Rome because, of course, at that time, and we talking before, we was talking about with the Ethiopian Bible. So Rome is in full control. Rome has total authority, and you got to keep in mind these are times when like Rome is brutal. They're brutal. You know what I mean? They ain't playing no games. So if they got a hit on you, they coming to get you. If you do something wrong, they taking your head off. And then you on the opposition, you had the Nazarenes, the Essenes. You had some of these Hebrews that were zealots. They was against Rome. They wasn't rocking with Rome for nothing. You had the Sicaries, the daggers. They carried daggers. They wasn't playing no games. They was taking the Romans. If they had to clash with the Romans, they taking their head off. They wasn't compromising with the Romans. That's why I know Paul is fake. Because the real Nazarenes wasn't rocking with the Romans at all. And unless the Romans fall in suit with what the doctrine is, which they wouldn't do. They're not giving up no flesh and blood. Yeshua was a Nazarene. I mean, he was a vegetarian. He was Nazarene. Now, in order to be a Nazarene, you got your locks grow. You can't eat certain foods. They were fruitarians. They were vegetarians. And there's other gospels outside of the Bible that talks about the Nazarenes and how they grew up as vegetarians and they wore their hair in long locks. But you don't get this depiction when you look at the scriptures. You would never think that Yeshua was a brother with locks and he didn't eat meat. And his brother and his mother, John the Baptist and his mother, all of them had locks like Rastas. You wouldn't expect that, but that's how they was living in the first century. That's why they was scorned. That's why Paul said, a man with long hair is ashamed. He was speaking against the prophets. Who else was he talking about?
Is it fair?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying the Nazarenes had long hair. That's all I'm about to say.
Is it fair to say that Jesus, when he died as a Jew?
Say it again one more time. I'm sorry.
Is it fair to say that when Jesus died, he died as a Jew?
Oh, yeah. Like the first century so-called Christians was Jews. According to the text, Yeshua, before he sent the 12 out. And the 12 out was supposed to go educate the lost house of Israel in the 4 corners of the world. So the original ministry is still Judaism, it's still Tanakh, it's still Torah at the end of the day. It's just that the Romans put that twist on it centuries later.
Right. And for those who may question what you're saying, they could go to Acts chapter maybe 24 to 27 and see about the Nazarenes. They call Paul the ringleader, that these groups actually are mentioned in the Bible. It's not just something you find in secular as well.
Right. Exactly. And then you have the Nazarene, Numbers chapter 6, which gives you the Nazarene order. It says, you let the locks grow and sustain from grapes and all this stuff. So if it states in Matthew's or whatever book where it states he fulfilled the law of being a Nazarene, that's telling on himself right there. Okay, he was a man with locks. He wasn't a blonde white man with stringy hair. That's theological warfare on the original essence of who these people were. So for years, for 2,000 years, we've been thinking the Messiah was white. It's only recently we're like, oh, maybe he was a brown-skinned man, or maybe he this, that. Even the History channels are even saying now that he was a man of color. They don't want to necessarily say he was a Negro, but they at least saying he was a Middle Easterner man of color.
Yeah, when I went to the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican actually that you showed St. Peter's Basilicus, they actually have the Madonna there, I believe. So,
right, they show him as being black.
Yeah, definitely. So, but they kind of, there's a whole story with it, but it's something that's, expressed.
Right. Because even that could get a little political too. Right.
But I did find that when I took the tour, a lot of, truths came out that I wasn't expecting,
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, man, we covered a lot of ground. Ultimately, I just, before I let you go, because you have such a wealth of knowledge and I respect that to the highest. What do you think about this whole thing in Revelation when it says that the Messiah or Christ was skin of bronze and hair of wool? What do you think about that?
Well, like I said, even biblical scholars, historians, PhDs are coming to the realization that Yahshua was a brown-skinned man. And then if you want to use biblical literature to back that, you could use that as an example to say, like, look, well, according to Revelations, this brother was a brown man, and that's his angelical body we're talking about. So if his angelical body is a brown man, well, damn sure, I'm sure he was brown in the flesh as well. You see what I'm saying? But yeah, when you really do the history about these people called the Hebrew Israelites, you're going to see that they're definitely a melanated people. They're definitely a brown-skinned people. They compared Moses with an Egyptian. When you look at the Egyptians, it's obvious.
Well, definitely. Thank you for the breakdown. So now we know that the Ethiopian Bible was not the first, as many people say. I think you did a great job of breaking that down.
Yes, maybe I got a part 2 to that called the Ethiopian Bible, a product of Rome, the Council of Chalcedon, the 9 Saints, and the Ethiopian Connection. And that one is going to put the nail in the bud. That's going to settle everything. So next time, hopefully we can go ahead and get that going and put the nail in the coffin with that.
Okay, very good. I learned a lot from your presentation. It's quite awesome.
Give thanks, brother.
A lot of people in the comments are saying you did an awesome job.
All right, give thanks.
Yes, indeed.
Appreciate the family out there.
Awesome, good deal. All right, so thank you very much, and we look forward to having you back on. Maybe you can come back on another Monday night. We typically want to do this on Monday nights.
Most definitely, indeed, we can do this. And I got some brothers too that's very vast in some of this information dealing with the first century Paul and the New Testaments that could intrigue your mind as well.
Okay, very good. Would you like to give some closing remarks? You have quite a few fans here tonight.
Yeah, shout out to the Creator Gang. I know what it is. You know what I mean? That's a little crew that we got. Research, study, deal with spirituality and knowledge. I appreciate you for having me on, having an opportunity to drop this information, because not too many people are investigating information on this scale. They're kind of just staying on the surface. But if we're going to deal with our spirituality and we're dealing with the destiny of our life and our life after death and what does life mean, we got to take it serious. We got to do research. We got to study and to really understand what we really believe in and accepting. With that, salute, King. Selah Shalom.
All right. Very well. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them how to follow you. You forgot that.
Yeah, you can follow me on YouTube. Just type in Selah Shalom TV in the search engine. Go ahead and subscribe. Likewise on Instagram, you can follow me at Selah Shalom TV on Instagram. And also Black Royal Family TV on Instagram. And reach out to me if you got any questions. Holler at me. I'm easy to find.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
All right, salute, King.
Yes, sir.
Different voices, but the same song. Building a world where we all belong. Kindness leading the way, breaking the chains. In the symphony of love, the theme remains. Embracing diversity, brighter days in sight. Watching the world sharing love and light. Hearts beating as one in our peaceful flight. Colors of harmony, painting the night. United we stand in love's pure might. Watching the world sharing love and light. Hearts beating as one in our peaceful flight. The colors of harmony, painting the night. United we stand in love's pure might.